Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today to discuss our State of Marketing to Engineers research. If you've been joining us for a while, you'll know that this is the fourth year that GlobalSpec and TREW Marketing have partnered together to conduct this research. And it's really exciting for us that each new year brings new discoveries, and we're really happy to be here today to share those with you. I'm going to start off by introducing my co-presenter, Wendy. Wendy is a CEO, technical marketing leader, author of Content Marketing Engineered, one of the Wall Street Journal's 10 most innovative entrepreneurs in America, and she holds a Texas fishing record. Over the last 20 years, Wendy and her team at TREW Marketing have helped hundreds of engineering and technology companies build trust and fill their pipelines using compelling technical content. I'm so happy to see you today, Wendy.
Thanks, Jen. I'm so excited to be here with you today. How about we introduce the audience to you? Jen Cochran is the marketing manager for audience development at GlobalSpec. She focuses on creating and improving all customer-facing elements such as collateral, media kits, their Marketing Maven blog, social media presence, websites, and press releases. So pretty much everything content here. She is also a strong brand ambassador, making sure that GlobalSpec presents their brand appropriately. Prior to joining the team at GlobalSpec 3 years ago, Jen worked both in-house on marketing teams and at agencies, and she received her education at Columbia University.
Thanks, Wendy. And thanks again to all of you for attending today's webinar. We have a full house today, which means there are a lot of marketers and business leaders who are seeking information to help them market to this unique, skeptical, data-driven audience and interested in data that's going to help you and your colleagues and teams market more effectively. So thank you for being here today. Before we dive in, I'm going to walk briefly through the purpose of our research and also our methodology. But before I get started, I do want to mention that we are going to take questions throughout today's entire presentation. So we will be answering all those questions if we have time during the broadcast here, or afterwards. You'll get an email with the answer to your question, and we will be compiling some of our most frequently asked questions. So you'll also get a copy of those. So as I mentioned, GlobalSpec and TREW have partnered together once again to conduct our research. We really are both driven by an interest in how engineers seek information and how marketers can use this information to improve the way they reach out to their audience. So this research paints a picture of the content consumption, search habits, and online preferences of today's engineers. And it's really designed to help you determine how to engage with them. This year, for obvious pandemic-related reasons, we knew we had to alter the survey a little bit and add questions to capture specifically how COVID-19 has impacted engineers and how they're doing their work. So we reached out to the GlobalSpec audience of engineering and technical professionals to get our answers. And we're really proud and happy to say that we have received the largest sample size to date in the history of our research. So it's definitely the most statistically relevant piece of research we've been able to provide to you, and you should really be able to get a lot from the results. So as much as I want to dive right into the data, I think it's really important to take a closer look at the respondent profile and get an idea of who we're talking about. Looking at who took this survey tells us a lot about who makes up the engineering workforce, and it helps us understand the survey answers that they provided to us. So first, when we talk about age range, 82% of the respondents are 46 years old or older, which is up from 52% in our previous year's study. 37% are between 56 and 65, and then 24% are between the ages of 46 and 55. The smallest portion this year was at 35 and under, which is at 8%. So it's not new to us that the engineering population is aging. It's something that we've talked about for a while, and this look at the respondents helps underscore that. That being said, it is important to remember that this is our largest sample size, so we do have a statistically relevant sample size for every age group. And when we look at company size, very large enterprises, which we defined as over 1,000 employees, and very small businesses, which are under 20 employees, represent over half of our respondents. We also see a lot of variety when it comes to industry, which is exactly what we like to see because it tells us that the responses we're getting represent the entire industrial landscape and aren't skewed towards the way a particular industry might function. So we have a good showing from engineering services, energy, aerospace and defense, automotive, semiconductor, and materials. And similar to previous years, the most responses came from engineering leadership or management roles with 33%, followed by engineers in a staff role at 32%. And with that intro, it's time to dive into the data. And so, Wendy, I'll pass it over to you now.
All right, let's do this. So we've divided up our findings into 4 main categories: engineers and online education, videos, podcast, and content preferences, where engineers find information, and finally, engineers' engagement with sales. Let's start with engineers and online education. New for this year, we asked engineers about online events. A little less than half have participated in a virtual trade show or conference. And we expect this might increase in 2021 before things go back to normal with in-person events. So for those engineers who have attended an online event, the overwhelming majority found the experience to be valuable. So if you're considering participating in a virtual event in 2021, this finding should be encouraging. Now, we also asked if your favorite in-person event or trade show is staged as a virtual event in 2021, are you likely to attend? And only 13% said no. So the rest, there's a lot of maybes out here at 56%, followed by yes at 31%. But I get this sense here, and you'll see this with the next slide, that there's a lot of confusion between what is a virtual event and what is a webinar. So it seems like a bit of a gray area. And so when you're looking at virtual events, I would strongly suggest you look for ones that have a strong conference component, as you would anyway with an in-person event in any other year. Those tend to be the ones anecdotally that we see at TREW Marketing that are most valued by our clients. So while virtual events are valued and people have had a great experience with them, webinars are valued twice as much as virtual events. Isn't that interesting? So again, it goes back to that technical conference, the strength of that side of the event. So here we see that 49% find webinars more valuable, 20% virtual events, and 28% are not sure. So that goes into the slippery slope between these 2 types of events.
Thanks, Wendy. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about videos, podcasts, and other content preferences that engineers have. So when it comes to video content, 96%, so nearly 100% of engineers watch some kind of videos from work. And this is up a little bit since our last year's study where it was at 93%. Which is even more impressive when you consider that many of these respondents are over 45, as we talked about. We once framed video as a millennial endeavor and something that only younger engineers were interested in, but now it's really clear that it's completely infiltrated the engineers' work environment. And in terms of quantity, we're seeing that nearly half of engineers, so 48%, watch videos for 1 hour or more each week.
Jen, I get a lot of questions about video quality. So I think there's some hesitation on B2B marketers' part about how to go into video and does it have to be this polished, high production piece. And when we're seeing this many people look at videos for this many hours, the trend is towards authentic, approachable videos, some that show your company culture in a way that might be as easy as filming an engineer on the manufacturing floor. It doesn't have to be that slick produced quality anymore. So those of you listening that want to lean into video but are not sure budgetarily or time how to do so, don't be afraid of starting small and scrappy.
Yeah, that's a great point, Wendy. And we have seen time and time again that engineers value the quality of the content and the technicality level over something that us marketers might consider flashy or slick or well produced. So you make a good point there. Moving over to podcasts, this year we added new questions about podcasts. This is something that we get a lot of questions about, and it seems to, in general, be really taking off. So we wanted to get an engineer's take on it. And what we found is that slightly over half of engineers listen to podcasts for work. So out of the group of podcast listeners, about half subscribe to podcast shows, and then 48% don't have any subscriptions. 37% subscribe to 1 to 5 podcasts, and the number of subscriptions trickles downward, and we see that only 4% subscribe to 10 or more podcasts. Again, out of the engineers that do listen to podcasts, 33% listen for somewhere between 6 to 20 minutes a week, and then 26% say they listen for 5 minutes or less. And when you think about the fact that the average podcast is 15 to 25 minutes per week, this data indicates that engineers are listening to about 1 episode of work per week. So what do we do with this kind of data? It does show us that podcasts are still an emerging content type for engineers, at least when it comes to work-related ones. So it's definitely something that's on the cutting edge and something to start thinking about, because we expect that it will grow throughout the years. So if you've been following our research over the years, this chart should not be surprising to you. It's a big one, but I'd like to take this opportunity to break it down for you a little bit. So we asked engineers how valuable the following types of content are when researching information to make a product or service decision. First and foremost, I think this really underscores how much content engineers are willing and excited to consume. The majority of respondents found all of these different types of content valuable, even the last one, which is podcasting. At the top, we have data sheets, case studies, white papers, and product demo videos, and which is in line with what we've seen over previous years. And as I mentioned, even though podcasts are least valued, the average engineer still listens to about 1 every week.
You know, I feel like this finding makes the case for repurposing, and not only starting with packaging the content in the form factor that most makes sense for that piece of content, but also thinking about what other ways could I present this information to capture other people. And so, as you mentioned, while podcasting is at the bottom here, but yet they're still listening, that same podcast could be spun into a blog post or created. It could be a video podcast where we have a video version of it. So there's lots of ways to meet the engineer where they're at and have more coverage along content type.
Yeah, exactly. And that's especially relevant because I talk to so many marketers that are trying to do more with less, you know? So if you've invested in creating this excellent content, why not, get it out there in as many ways as you can? Okay, so now we're going to talk about gated content, which is content that requires you to complete some sort of form in order to access it. As many marketers know, it's a popular and effective way to generate leads on your website. And we spend a lot of time thinking about forms and, how to make them most effective. So we asked engineers what types of content would most likely entice them to provide their information. So the top 3 most valued content pieces are the same as last year, although white papers did jump 10 percentage points, and they bumped CAD drawings down into a close second place. Video tutorials is a new response option this year, and it comes in at 32%, which is just ahead of webinar and product configurators. And we did find that engineers are least enticed to provide their contact info for ROI calculators and infographics. That might be because they see those as less valuable when it comes to making purchasing decisions. And then only 17% of engineers responded that they're never willing to fill out a web form in exchange for information. So we do see that engineers, although we know them to be highly skeptical, are willing to exchange their information for content that they perceive to be valuable.
And Jen, I see this as another gray area where video tutorials and webinars are really sort of the same thing in my mind. They're not quite that different. And so it might be that your next webinar could be called a video tutorial, or you could spin the format just slightly to see if you can get a higher bump of conversion.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
All righty. Now let's talk about where engineers go to find information to make purchase decisions. Well, as Jen mentioned at the beginning, we wanted to have a focus on COVID. And so we asked, when industry conferences and trade shows were canceled, where do you turn as an alternate source for information or for networking? And we see that engineers are turning to their tried and true channels, such as supplier websites, e-newsletters, and industry websites. These have long been popular channels when engineers turn to when seeking for information. This wasn't a surprise at all. So, in the wake of the cancellations, though, an increased number of engineers turned to trade publications. So this switch might be because often trade publications are responsible for organizing in-person events, and engineers are looking for the news that they would have normally found in person at those events. So as we see on the next slide, engineers' interest in e-newsletters remains consistent. As in past years, 92% of engineers subscribe to at least one e-newsletter. 43% of engineers subscribe to 3 to 5, and nearly 1/5 subscribe to 6 or more. And we always find this one is interesting when we break it down by age. So engineers aged 36 to 45 are most likely to subscribe to 6 or more newsletters. That's nearly double the rate of their younger counterparts. So while the youngest engineers are more likely to subscribe to at least one, they seem to be more discerning on how many newsletters they're willing to receive. And then finally, on e-newsletters, no surprise to you marketers that subject lines are very, very important. 42% scan e-newsletters for intriguing subject lines, and then they delete the rest. 21% open most or all to scan for content. And so please, please focus on relevant and attention-grabbing subject lines, as well as valuable content contained within your e-newsletters. So new this year, we added a question on retargeting, or what we called personalized ads, to the engineers that we surveyed. So here was the question. Imagine when browsing online, you are served up a personalized advertisement for a product you recently viewed on a vendor website. What might your reaction be? Well, while we marketers are really used to retargeting, we've embraced this, and certainly all the time on B2B sites, B2C sites, excuse me, I'll go look at a pair of shoes on Nordstrom and it'll show up on several other sites, and no big deal. Well, when it comes to engineers, you might not be surprised to see that 30%, a full 30% of engineers are creeped out by personalized ads. However, nearly as many, at 26%, point to increased awareness and recall of the product, and 18% use it as a reminder to revisit the product page. So to take full advantage of targeted ads without alienating your technical buyers, make sure your targeting is accurate and not overbearing. Additionally, review your lead nurturing process to ensure that these prospects aren't creeped out by representatives that mention their browsing history when that salesperson makes that call.
Yeah, that's a great point. This in particular would be a great slide to share with your sales teams and talk to them about that.
Absolutely. Now, every year we also focus on social, and this always ends up being a surprising and somewhat controversial slide with marketers. So, similar to past studies, engineers do not place much value in mainstream social media when it comes to their work. Professional community networks, such as those tied with professional associations or programming sites like Stack Overflow or GitHub, were seen as slightly more valuable, possibly because in-person networking has been so difficult. So despite not associating social networking with their work, most engineers and people in general have social media accounts and will be exposed to your brand as they browse in their free time. And as you can see on this slide, LinkedIn, it continues to dominate the number 2 position and be an important tool. And as LinkedIn continues to add more and more features to help you connect and nurture relationships, it's definitely one to keep a close eye on.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we usually give the advice that most of these social media channels, I would say Facebook, Twitter, are kind of necessary to have as you establish your brand. The same way that you would put up a website, you would also put up those social media profiles. But if you're really looking to hone in on just a couple social media networks, I would definitely place LinkedIn on your list.
Yeah. And Jen, I would like to see us add more options to this question in future years. So, if those of you listening or watching, if you have ideas, specific social channels that you think we should be monitoring and researching next year, give us a shout on LinkedIn. Let us know because we want to continue to monitor this closely as social continues to evolve and new channels spring up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you think about it, who knows the next time we do this survey what the hot new platform will be. So now I'm going to talk about how engineers use the content that they found to make purchasing decisions and make contact with sales. So this is a big cornerstone piece of our research because we're always so curious about the buying journey of the engineer. And this year we found that engineers have moved online to complete much of the buying process. And while that's certainly probably a necessity in 2020 and 2021, this is a trend that has been coming for years. So 62% of respondents completed more than half of the buying process online. And this underscores the need to make sure your content pops up when an engineer is searching, especially now with the lack of in-person touch points. An engineer has always had an aversion to speaking to salespeople directly, at least until they've narrowed down their prospects. Being found independently by your target audience is more important than ever, really. And we're curious to see how the buyer's journey is different for engineers at different age groups. So looking at this chart, you might not be surprised to see that engineers 45 and under are spending even more time online before choosing to speak to someone at a company. But if you look at more seasoned engineers, we do see, while that they do their buying work online slightly less often, we're still seeing a majority of them spending more than half their buying process online. 55% of engineers over 65 spend at least 50% of their journey online. I think this is really important to point out because I think there's been a narrative in the past of only millennials are spending so much time researching online and they're the only ones that are doing this. But the reality of today's workplace is that all engineers, regardless of how veteran they are working in this manner. And when we see them finally take their journey to a more direct communication with the vendor, they really do prefer email over other forms of communication. And you'll see that on the screen at 52%. Phone calls are preferred by 29% of engineers. And I would like to point out also that online chat has grown slightly over previous years. It's sitting at 5% now. So the adoption of this sales tool in the B2B engineering space remains really low, but it is something that we see steadily increasing. So definitely something to start thinking about at this juncture as we predict that it will continue to grow in popularity.
Well, we are so happy that you joined us today to listen to the results of our research findings. And we want to provide you with more resources where you can dig in deeper. So first, for TREW Marketing, you can visit trewmarketing.com. That's TREW marketing.com. And there you'll see a resources section and you can find my book, which released this past year called Content Marketing Engineered. You can subscribe to my podcast. We have a blog where we publish weekly and lots of ebooks and other resources to help you along your journey in marketing to technical audiences. You see here on the slide how to reach me personally. I would absolutely love to hear from you, what you think about this research, and again, your suggestions for what you like might suggest that we change or improve in future years.
Thanks. And on the GlobalSpec side of things, you can find us at globalspec.com and at globalspec.com/advertising. We also have a blog at marketingmaven.globalspec.com. And you can check out also some other recent research we did, specifically talking to content marketers in the manufacturing space. So, now that we've talked about what engineers are doing, if you're curious what your peers are doing, you can learn about that there. Also, as Wendy mentioned, I am on LinkedIn, and I would love to hear from you. And also kind of a final reminder to put any questions that you have in the chat function now. Although we are going to be wrapping things up, we are going to be answering all those questions. So in addition to reaching out to us on social media, if there's anything you want to jot down before you forget, now is a great time to do that. So yeah, thanks again to everyone for joining us today. We'll leave this presentation up for a few more minutes so that you have access to the question box. But yeah, again, thank you all so much, and we hope you learned something today.
Bye, everybody.